My name is Dr. Richard Montgomery, and today I would like to make an appeal to Senator John Clyburn, the black community of South Carolina, and all of the Super Tuesday states who in the next few days will be making their decisions on who should be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. In context, America knew that Donald Trump was a racist, a xenophobe, and a misogynist when they elected him in 2016. In the past 4 years, we've heard the President of the United States describe neo-Nazis as good people and target professional athletes for speaking out against police killings of unarmed black men. This kind of rhetoric should not make anyone in the black community believe that the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue will work to improve their lives. That makes the 2020 presidential election one of the most important presidential elections of this century. A few hours ago, longtime South Carolina Senator James Cluburn gave Status Quo Joe Biden his endorsement in this week's South Carolina Democratic primary election. I would like to tell you personally, Senator Clyburn, I'm very disappointed in you. I hold you in the highest esteem as a civil rights leader, as I do Senator John Lewis, but I believe you got it wrong on this one. As a black elected official, I believe it's your responsibility to give voice to all your constituents. But in the black community, we expect that your presence there gives voice to the needs of our community specifically, because as a black man, we believe you understand uniquely the failures of our country to hold up on its promise for equality for all. I know you get it, because in your endorsement of Status Quo Joe, you said that this election is about making the greatness of this country accessible and affordable for all. But let's unpack that statement for a moment. Senator Clyburn, you organized protests and even went to jail fighting for the civil rights of black people in this country. Shortly after, Status Quo Joe was using his power as a legislator to block black children from attending the better-funded white public schools. My question to you, sir, is how can you endorse a person who has fought against what you have fought for? How could any black elected official endorse someone who has supported segregation, especially in a place like South Carolina? If you want to talk about accessibility, how about we talk about the 1994 crime bill and the author of it, Status Quo Joe? Throughout American history, when access to jobs decreases in the community, there is increased crime in the city. Black people have always been the hardest hit under these circumstances. I grew up in Akron, Ohio. Akron at one time had every major tire manufacturer, and work was available. When those manufacturers left town, most of the remaining jobs went to white men. White women and African American people lost access to work. And I watched over many years the very moral people become less moral in an attempt to feed themselves. And this phenomenon is not unique to Akron. It happened in Canton, Youngstown, Toledo, Dayton, and mid-sized cities across this nation. And in response to this national jobs crisis that was disproportionately impacting the black community, Status Quo Joe wrote a bill to lock up the most downtrodden forever. Senator Clyburn, you have to know, or even be related to people who are in jail today as we speak because of this law. From you, Senator, I expect courage and leadership, as well as the people you endorse. Instead of investing in these people and preparing them for the 21st century workforce, our criminal justice system locked away fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters like animals. That, sir, is not access to the dream that was promised. In your endorsement, you also talk about making America affordable. Status Quo Joe wants to continue with incremental access to health care. This one is personal for me. My dad worked almost 30 years as a case manager for the Department of Job and Family Services. And when he retired, he had the chance to keep his insurance coverage for himself and my mother. Well, the governor kicked spouses off of these plans, leaving my mother without any health insurance. Well, a few years ago now, she was diagnosed with dementia. But to get the help that she needs, for the long-term care that she needs, the government program that provides this care wants my dad to sign a paper that basically says the expenses of his wife's care can either be paid back by her spouse or they can sign over their home to cover those expenses. My father took great pride in working hard and buying a home to raise his family and to later retire in. You have to ask yourself, what kind of country do we live in when we tell our seniors they have to give up something they've worked their entire lives for if they want to live? My wife and I are both highly educated. I have a PhD and she has 2 master's degrees. We are a middle-class family who should have enough income to experience all of the freedoms of our years of sacrifice and work. However, I have a son with a medical disability who requires 24-hour medical care, and parents on a fixed income who have more medical expenses each month than they have money. So while my profile looks good on paper, I, like many of my other middle-class college-educated friends who live in South Carolina, have the responsibility of helping aging parents, paying back student loans, and trying to sustain a good quality of life for my family. There is nothing that Status Quo Joe's healthcare policy will do to ensure that all Americans have affordable access to health insurance. And in South Carolina, Senator, your constituents don't have enough money for their care, and South Carolina hospitals are suing them to recover the money. This is America. Life or death should not be about whether you can afford it. Senator Clyburn, I ask that you reconsider your endorsement of Status Quo Joe and consider placing your respected influence behind Senator Bernie Sanders. As a person interested in politics, I've seen politicians show up in the black community, make lots of promises, and call themselves fighters. But as my dear brother, Dr. Cornel West says, you have to move beyond what people say and ask, who are they really? And when times when times in this country have been rough, Status Quo Joe has simply kicked the can down the road. Bernie Sanders has been called radical. In America, it shouldn't be radical to ensure all children have a good education by giving schools the funding they need. It shouldn't be called radical for each of us to find a job we like and not just keep a job for the health care. It should not be radical in a state like South Carolina to engage in criminal justice reform when more than 70% of the South Carolina prisons are populated with black men and being shot down like dogs as the officer did with Walter Scott. Senator Clyburn, I know it's unlikely that you will follow suit, but people like me who respect you could not quietly accept your endorsement at this critical time. As I conclude, I'd like to turn the page and speak to the black South Carolinians, as well as those black communities in the Super Tuesday states. We cannot give Status Quo Joe Biden admission into our community because he was the vice president of the first black president. On the application, you have to mark yes or no to the questions. Have you ever supported segregation as a regular citizen or as a policymaker? Answers yes. Next question. Have you ever written or introduced policy that would lead to the mass incarceration of black people? Answers yes. Stop there. Application denied. Bernie Sanders has been the front runner in this election cycle because his vision includes making right what has been wrong in the black community. The Status Quo Joes and the other middle-of-the-road Democrats that are still asking us to wait on progress, wait on progress. It'll come. Have hope. Have faith. Progress in this conversation, this political climate has been so dangerous that they've labeled it socialism. Democratic socialism is different than socialism. Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist, and democratic socialism, by definition, is a system in place to benefit the citizens. Under this umbrella, most major industries are privately owned. But instead of these billion-dollar-a-year corporations getting handouts and tax breaks from the government, they pay their fair share. And that money is used to improve the lives of citizens. Unfortunately, the government we have today does not function to improve the lives of regular people. In the next few days, we have a chance to move beyond the status quo. We have to turn out, we have to say no to Status Quo Joe, and vote for the people's candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders. Thank you.